Hey guys, before we get into the video, I just wanted to give a huge thank you and shout out to Braden Games 08. He became my very first Patreon, and I am seriously appreciative of it. If any of you would like to join my Patreon, the link is in the description down below. So with the Patreon funds and the sales of my merch, which is also in the description down below, I am looking to start up a PC fund because my laptop is about 4 years old and it's getting slower. And I really want to keep making videos for you guys, so if any of you are able to support, I would be truly grateful. And even if you can't, thank you so much for watching my videos. You guys are awesome. And thank you all for joining the Coven. Now let's get into the video. Join the Coven. I would not belong to him. A story written by devildollx. This happened 2 years ago on the day of my 28th birthday. I was working at a small double-sided drive-through only coffee stand about 30 minutes outside of Seattle. I had been working there for about a year at this point, and was always scheduled to work the closing shift during the week and the opening shift on the weekends. In the 7 years I had worked as a barista at this point, I had never been confronted with a situation that challenged my feeling of security while working alone. And despite having heard numerous stories over the years of other baristas in the area who had suffered violent or dangerous interactions with some of their customers, I considered myself fortunate not to have to place myself among them. Unfortunately, on this day, that would change. Thursday, November 7th, 6:45 p.m. I was preparing to close the stand at 7 p.m. like usual. It was very rare that I would have customers come through the stand past 6:30, and because of this, I felt myself jump slightly when I looked up from the espresso machine I was cleaning to see a man standing behind the glass of the closed window beside me. Adding to my alarm was the fact he had made no noise whatsoever as he approached the stand, and he made no attempt to grab my attention once he got there. Instead, he stood behind the window in complete silence, his mouth awkwardly fixed into an unnatural-looking smile. At first, I wasn't even sure he was a customer at all, considering the idea he may be a part of a large group of transients and homeless that were known at the time to reside in the area and who occasionally came up to the stand to ask for free coffee or water. For safety reasons, I typically refrained from serving walk-up customers after dark, but because he now knew I had seen him, the rules of good customer service required I at least acknowledge the fact he was there. So reluctantly, I decided to serve him. He introduced himself as Ivan. He was around my age, seemed reasonably well kept in the case of his clothing, and overall appearance looked pretty clean. And despite a slight Eastern European accent, his English was very good. His eyes, however, were utterly unnerving. His gaze made my stomach feel uneasy. Immediately, my intuition was alerting me that something about this individual was very wrong. Every red flag possible was beginning to show in my mind, and I could not shake the deep, almost overwhelming sense of darkness that I felt coming from this person. There was an evil in him that I couldn't ignore, though I soon would find out exactly why I was feeling this way. After greeting him as politely as I could manage despite my growing hesitations, I began preparing my machine to make him a drink. However, he didn't seem to know what he wanted to order, and I asked him twice what I could get started for him, before I slightly recognized the fact that he was very likely not here to place an order. Eventually, he abandoned ordering altogether, and instead directed our interaction towards small talk. He asked me where I was from, how long I had been working at the stand, etc. I answered each of these questions with short, abrupt answers, hoping my tone and clear lack of engagement would convey the fact I wasn't interested in continuing any further. Since he was not a paying customer, and because I was about to close. After a long pause, he asked slowly, "So, do you have a boyfriend?" Annoyed, I replied curtly, "No." At this point, I was completely ready to end our interaction, so I told him that I needed to finish closing up so that I could go home. Upon hearing this, he walked away from the window he had been standing at, mentioning in his descent that he's looking forward to seeing me again very soon. A minute or so passes, and he was out of sight. Yet my gut told me that he was not, however, far away. I could feel his dark energy nearby, and I knew he was watching me from somewhere beyond my line of vision. Cautiously, I closed up the stand, locked the doors and windows, walked to my car, and drove home. By the following day, I had all but forgotten the encounter I had had with that guy, and went to work as usual. 7 p.m. rolls around, and once again I am just about to end my shift and close the stand. I am nearly finished closing out the register when a brief moment of movement catches my eye from outside the window on the opposite side of the stand. I turned my head towards the area in question, and there, in full view of both me and the security cameras, stood the guy from yesterday. My stomach sank quicker than I knew previously to be possible, and I was immediately very aware of how cold it was inside of the stand. He smiled at me with a predatory-like grin, waved, and then proceeded to pull open the closed window in front of him. Instead of waiting for me to cross the small distance within the stand that stood between us and open it for him, as I usually would, and although he didn't present himself aggressively, there was something incredibly threatening about his choosing to do that. It had left me feeling helplessly, hopelessly unsafe at that moment, and that was not a feeling I was familiar with, or, as I cleared my throat and told him as firmly as possible that I was off the clock and wouldn't be able to make anything for him as my machine was already cleaned and my register closed out for the day. His smile widened further as he replied, "It's okay. I didn't come for the coffee. I came for you." Upon hearing this, I noticed a shift in the energy building between us. The fear I had previously been overcome with now made a sudden and jolting transition into a red-lining level of irritation. "I don't care what you came for," I told him as sternly as I could manage. "It's going to have to wait until tomorrow because I am closed." At this, he chuckled a bit before finally raising both of his hands as an indication of surrender, saying, all right, fair enough." His smile disappeared. His eyes became even more focused on me. His gaze intensified. "Then I will see you tomorrow," he said, in a way that felt less like a statement and more like a threat. I swallowed hard, and once he was out of view, I rushed to the window and slammed it shut, throwing the lock into place. Again, despite not being able to visibly confirm his presence nearby, I knew that he was there, and I could feel his eyes fixated upon me. I left the stand quickly and got into my car to drive home. This time, however, he remained heavily on my mind for the rest of the night, robbing me entirely of any sleep at all. The following morning was a Saturday, so per my usual schedule I got up insanely early to work the 5 a.m. opening shift. I arrived at the stand at 10 minutes to 5, and for the first few hours of my shift, everything was as it would normally be. 8:30 rolls around, and it's now, finally, no longer freezing and dark outside, as the November mornings here tend to be. The sun had broken through the clouds and was steadily burning them off. As I was admiring the weather out the window of the stand, I noticed a familiar truck approaching. As it neared closer, I recognized it as my ex-boyfriend Jonathan. I found this exceptionally odd, as he and I were not currently on very friendly terms, due to his cheating that ended our relationships. About 6 months earlier, he pulled up slowly to the ledge of the open window I was occupying, and I asked him skeptically what he was doing here. "I'm sure I'm probably not someone you were wanting to see today, I know, but I just wanted to come by and wish you a happy birthday, and see how you're doing." Just as I was about to thank him for the birthday wishes and inform him that no, indeed, he isn't someone I'd wanted to see that day, I was still pretty hurt from his cheating. I noticed someone about 100 yards away approaching the stand on foot. It was Ivan. I whispered quickly to Jonathan that I needed him to stay here with me, even if another customer pulls in for service behind him, until the guy who had just walked up is gone. I could tell he was able to register the fear in my eyes, and he agreed immediately to stay. I brought as much focus into my demeanor as I could manage at that time, and turned to face the window on the opposite side of the stand, just as Ivan approached it. I walked slowly over to him and noticed right away that he had been crying. His eyes were bloodshot, and a few tears dripped slowly down his cheeks. Disregarding his obvious emotional state, I informed him that he needed to leave, as I was not going to serve him. Before my statement reached its conclusion, however, he cut my words off abruptly. "I don't need this anymore. You can have it." As he said this, he threw what I later came to recognize as his Russian passport into the stand through the open window. I picked it up, puzzled, and with a mix of both caution and disinterest, I asked him why he would no longer be needing it. "I just won't." I allowed his words to hang heavily between us, while I attempted to make sense in my mind of what a gesture like this might mean, if anything at all, before I felt a strong bite of dread inside my chest. The fear crept slowly into my throat before finally escaping past my lips in an audible gasp, giving Ivan the confirmation he had been hoping for that I understood what was about to happen here. No guest to a foreign country would willingly discard or abandon their passport unless they intended to see to completion of an act, an absolute finality. In an effort to sever the non-verbal conversation going place within the locked gaze Ivan and I had currently had on one another, I glanced over my shoulder at Jonathan, who now had the "what the hell is going on" look on his face. In an instant he recognized the desperate, pleading fear in my eyes. This caused his own expression to quickly change to one of panicked urgency as he attempted to understand what had just taken place between the stranger and myself. As I turned back to Ivan and noticed immediately that his crying had stopped, his tears were now placed with a look of what I can only describe as complete and utter insanity. This is the point where the dynamics of our interaction shifted indefinitely. "God came to me last night in my dreams," he began slowly. "He told me, 'You will be my wife, You are my wife, you are mine, you are for me. A sickening, sadistic smile curled the corners of his mouth up in such a way it was almost physically painful to witness. My heart began throwing itself violently against the inside of my chest as adrenaline surged through my system. You are my wife, he stated again. You are my wife, and now you will come with me, right now. At this, he planted his hands firmly onto the ledge of the window that stood before him and began to lift himself onto it. Realizing now that he was attempting to crawl through the window into the stand, I practically threw myself across the small distance between he and I and quickly slammed the window shut, locking it. He pushed his weight back down off the ledge, paused, and then proceeded to give me a look that made me truly understand the meaning of having one's blood run cold. I felt the inside of me began to quiver, in a way I had never felt before, an anxious vibration that was working its way throughout my entire body. This was not over yet. I had understood this. At this, Ivan offered me a quick wink and began to move with obvious purpose toward the back of the stand. Soon, I could hear a faint but distinguished beep, beep, beep of the buttons being punched on the electronic keypad that secured the lock on the back door. Ivan was trying to get through the only actual entrance to the stand. In my mind, I knew there was no way he could ever manage to guess the 4-number code, and dismissed any unrising concern that he would manage to gain entry. Not going to be that easy, I said under my breath, though I was unsure if I truly believed that. A sudden realization I had spoken far too soon arrived like a dead weight thrown directly at my gut. The dread that had followed, I heard next, is something I will never forget. It slammed itself violently into my present state of mind, and with so much force, I almost fell back a few steps. Adrenaline immediately overtook my system in its entirety, and in an instant, my vision tunneled itself as I heard the fateful sound of the electronic keypad indicating a successful code entry, followed by the loud and heavy thunk of the steel deadbolt retreating quickly back into the door. All I could see was the door in front of me, nothing else. It was as if there was a glaring spotlight illuminating the door and the evil that was about to walk through it. All else around me fell into darkness. Time felt as if it had stopped entirely. I no longer had a sense of it, or of the space around me in which I currently occupied. As the door began to slowly push open from the outside, I could hear an almost deafening scream resonate powerfully throughout the walls of the stand, expelled solely by the force of fear. As I stood there completely paralyzed, I bore witness to the largest knife I had ever seen enter through the opening door first, followed by Ivan's firmly gripped hand around it. It was only then that I realized the scream I was hearing was my own, as Ivan passed the remainder of his body through the opening of the back door and into the stand. My scream suddenly silenced himself. Before I continue any further, let me just say that until you personally experience a situation that demands you to access your fight or flight response, you have no idea what that response is going to ultimately be. The type of fear that's required to trigger this defense mechanism in the first place is more than most people ever realize. How you will react to it will be involuntary. In this moment, I recognize the simple fact that regardless of whatever it is this guy had planned for me here today, I intended to survive. And not simply survive, but I intended to execute a lesson this guy clearly needed to learn. Never underestimate someone's capability to persevere or the fight that drives them. Remembering at this that Jonathan was still in his truck on the other side of the stand, I ran to the window and screamed desperately through the now closed and locked panel of glass. "Jonathan, he's got a freaking knife!" Jonathan's eyes grew huge, and he threw open the driver's side door and flung from his truck towards the back of the building. Then, in the furthest corner of my vision, I caught sight of the dark, looming presence enter into the space of the small interior of the stand. Ivan, now standing no further than 10 feet from me, reeked of an evil that overtook every inch of space within the small building we now occupied together. It made the air so heavy around me that breathing started to become difficult. It felt thick and toxic in my lungs, nearly causing me to choke. As my struggle to breathe increased, Ivan began to close the few feet of space between us by taking slow, taunting steps in my direction. His knife was gripped firmly in his hand, which rested at his side. But the look he had on his face in this moment was so intense that it felt as if it were made of its own blade. He used his eyes to cut into me deeply, over and over again, and spoke softly through the visual silence. "You are my wife. You are my wife." Ivan ultimately only managed to take a total of 3 steps toward me before I saw an arm being thrown around his neck from behind, as I stood there in a state of paralysis due to fear. I watched as Jonathan pulled Ivan back by the neck with so much force his feet flew out from beneath him. Suddenly, both Ivan and Jonathan were on the ground right outside the door, with Jonathan securing Ivan in a headlock that proved nearly impossible to break away from. Jonathan yelled strict instructions to Ivan not to move, not a single muscle, or he would choke the life out of him. Surprisingly, Ivan remained completely still, never once making any signs of resistance. Jonathan kicked the knife away from his reach and told me to pick it up, secure it, and call the cops. It would feel like hours before the cops arrived, thanks to the massive amount of adrenaline still in my system, though in reality, it was really only a few minutes. Soon, the entire area was completely overtaken by more law enforcement than I had ever witnessed responding to a single call before. Having moved very little from the place I initially stood since calling 911, I watched as at least 6 cops descended on Ivan at once, relieving the grip Jonathan had around his neck, and forcibly, more than necessary to my silent pleasure, detaining him and carrying him practically hogtied into a waiting cruiser. Apparently, while speaking with the cops after being securely restrained and unable to flee, Ivan insisted continually that I was his wife. God had told him after all that I was intended for him. I belonged to him, God said. He was simply there that morning to collect that which he had been promised. Please lock your doors. A story written by Groundbreaking Local. I posted this a while ago, but it got lost. However, since it's been a year after the incident, I figured this would be a good place to share it, as it is about someone I never, ever want to come across again. It all started and ended the day after I took my last final at this community college. I don't know if he was a stalker or if it was a break-in gone weird. So from the beginning I was so nervous that I was going to fail this one class and was not going to be able to receive my AA degree. Later in the day, I was out at the pool at my apartment complex with some friends and my roommates when I checked my phone and saw I had passed my class. I got so excited I told everyone We were celebrating because I was the last one to have a final. It was 3 days before I got to walk and graduate with this degree that I decided we should have some fun before we all went our separate ways. As it got later into the night, we decided not to go out and stay in. We invited a couple more people over and went on with the night. Around 2 in the morning, people started to leave and head to bed. The only people left were my 2 roommates, both of the people they were dating, and one other friend. We were still messing around, and because our apartment was on the first floor and next to the pool, we went to go night swimming. As soon as we were done with that, I was ready to just hang out and be in for good for the night. My roommates and the other friend all left to go somewhere else for a little, which was fine, nothing out of the ordinary for me to be at home alone. I got some food and went to my room to hang out until they got back. The way my room is set up in our apartment, it's all the way in the back farthest away from the front door, and the patio door in my room is behind the kitchen, and you'd have to go through the whole apartment to get there. Because our apartment was in the front of the complex and near the pool, it was near the front gate at the time. The gate was left open because it was broken. I have never had an issue with living this close up front until this night. My room has one big window, and you can easily see into my room when I don't have the blinds or curtains shut. I had a closet with mirror doors, which if you look through the window you can see every part of my room in it. So while I was waiting for my friends to get back, I fell asleep. The last time I looked at the clock, it was 3:30 in the morning. Also, key part in this, my bedroom light was on when I went to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was around 5:30 a.m. There were slow flashes going off, like I had a strobe light going off in the corner of my room. I woke up really confused and thought it was my friends coming back to mess with me. Once my eyes got more adjusted because the room was now dark, I realized that, in fact, it was not my friends messing with me, but a single man who was at least 6'1", wearing a green Nike hoodie with the hood on in the corner of my room, by my closet, holding a phone up, taking pictures of me, mind you. I had tiny Sophie shorts on, with one of my legs hanging out of my covers. I don't think he realized I had woken up, and when reality sunk in, I said, "What the hell?" And instead of coming at me or running out of my room, the man put the phone down and walked out of my room, not saying anything, not in a panic, just walked out. Me, being an idiot, I ran after him saying, "Hey!" I tried to follow him out, but once I got to the front door, I didn't see him anywhere. Ran back inside, woke up all my roommates asking if they were messing with me. When they said no, I called the police. I looked around my room and saw the only thing missing was my laptop. That was on my desk in the far corner of my room. The weirdest part was 3 other MacBook laptops, 2 wallets, and at least a $300 speaker. But the only thing missing from the whole apartment was my laptop. Later on, I found out that the front door to the patio door had never been locked when everyone got back, and that the police couldn't find the guy or my computer. What made things worse was that the SIM disk from my camera was in the computer, so all of my personal photos from that camera were now accessible to this guy. Some things I saw a couple days later while I was getting ready to move out freaked me out even more. Like I said earlier, if you looked into my window, you could see my closet mirrors and see just about my whole room. One thing that was super noticeable was my tapestry. It was a very distinct and different kind of tapestry. It has 2 wolves howling up at the moon and is all black and white. One day while I was packing my car, I happened to look up at it, starting to get dark as I looked up and noticed in the apartment above mine, through the blinds on the wall, was the exact same tapestry as the one that was in my room. What creeped me out even more was the fact that I had little purple lights I put on it from my mom because she knows my favorite color is purple. In that room above the lights, in the fan, were switched out for purple ones. As if I wasn't creeped out enough, an all-black cat came up to the window and my stomach started to feel weird because the year before I was still living in my room. I got a baby kitten that was all black. In the end, the guy was never found, and I never saw his face, which freaks me out to this day. And I hope I never come across him again. I never got my laptop back and never found my SIM disk to my camera. The best advice to anyone in College Town is no matter what, always lock the doors because you never know what you could wake up to.